Is there something missing here? No? Well, I'll wait for it. Okay. So I definitely want to finish this here. So the plan is to finish chapter 23 now today. Then we'll do 22 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. We're at 1 at 3. Sorry, 24. Did I say 23? Yeah. We'll do 24 now, 22 tomorrow, and 1 tomorrow afternoon. Do we have enough time tomorrow afternoon? No.
Yes.
Well, it depends on you.
How much is enough?
Well, do we have 3 hours in the afternoon?
It's in front of you.
Sorry. I have 14:45 until 17. Okay. An hour, 2 hours and 15 minutes. If I take out the break, I have more, right? And I even try, maybe I can start chapter number 1 already in the morning. Because 2 is not as hard. No, 22 is not as hard. And this chapter now, it really isn't that difficult. It's basically you read it, you can understand. But it just gives you a sense of like how it all fits. And there's some 2 important verses in there, extremely important. Also one of those verses that are always cited, 12 minutes and not enough. So we got to 6. No, sorry, that's wrong. 24, what verse did we get to?
13.
13.
The worst case scenario will come next year with chapter 1. Fully if it is all
Okay, well let's see, but really it would be like, okay then, we need to continue. Okay, now since the absurd consequences you adduce, absurd consequences you present, are not plausible with regard to emptiness, your rejection of emptiness is not plausible to me. So, what you're saying, what the other person is saying, that nothing can exist and no form of truth, etc., all that which you present here, in the form of absurdities, in the form of consequences, this way of presenting absurdities is said to be much more effective than saying, oh, it cannot be this, that, and the other, because. Okay? So instead of saying, well, phenomena, like to use the Buddhist, the Prasangika view, phenomena do not exist inherently because they were dependently arisen. That is one way of saying it, and that is definitely reasoning that is applied, but that just in itself is not said to be enough. In the Prasangika school, which literally means the word translates into consequentialist, someone who uses what are called consequences. So consequences are really just logical absurdities. So if I believe that something exists inherently, those would be the absurdities. That's much more efficient if I say, if this table existed inherently, then I could not use it. It could not change. I could not interact with it. I would know already it's a table. It wouldn't depend on me calling it such. If it were a table and it was inherently beautiful, for instance, everyone would perceive it that way, etc. So those are all absurdities. It would not exist interdependently. It would not exist by way of depending on tasks, conditions, etc. So pointing out these absurdities is said to be more beneficial than just saying, well, it doesn't exist inherently because it's independently arisen, has arisen in independence.
What is plausible?
Pardon?
What is plausible in English?
Plausible. Oh, it makes sense. Yeah. No, plausible means it's not, doesn't make sense to me. Like, it's not plausible means it makes sense. Not plausible is, to me, it doesn't make sense. Is that right? Believable. Alright, what's the Tibetan word? Plausible. Mitedo. Tenable. Usually it's tenable, acceptable or reasonable. Okay, so that's the Tibetan meaning of the word. So since the absurd consequences, so consequences, as I said, here the other person also presents consequences that according to this other person are logical. So the other person says, if you say phenomena don't exist inherently, it means there's not. That couldn't exist, and that couldn't exist, and this couldn't exist. Those are absurdities that the other person presents, which of course from a Prasangika school point of view is exactly the other way around. If everything existed inherently, nothing could arise, nothing would cease. There wouldn't be the Four Noble Truths. There wouldn't be the Four Results. There wouldn't be the 8 persons that approach the Four Results and experience them or abide in those. There would not be any Sangha, no Dharma, no Buddha. That's the Prasangika school point of view. The other person's point of view is just exactly the opposite. And so
we're speaking now in the 13th phrase.
And Nagarjuna now saying, since the absurd consequences you earlier on during the first 6 verses, you adduced, you basically presented, they are not tenable, they're not reasonable with regard to emptiness. They don't make sense. Your rejection of emptiness is not reasonable to me. Okay. For one, then he goes on to say in verse 14, so in other words he says, what you're saying doesn't make sense. Your explanation of emptiness doesn't make sense. Your reasoning does not make sense to me. Then in verse 14, for one to whom emptiness makes sense, everything makes sense. For one to whom emptiness does not make sense, nothing makes sense. Right? If you really truly understand that phenomena don't exist inherently, then you understand that anything is possible. It is only possible because things don't exist inherently. Therefore, you can have something that doesn't exist right now come into existence tomorrow. Why? Because it does so independent on something else. You can remove suffering because there's a cause to suffering, which you can remove. Why? Because it's possible to apply causes and conditions to the removal of suffering. Okay? So, suffering is possible. Suffering is possible, of course, because there's no inherent existence, but also the removal of suffering is possible. We live, we interact, we change, we have a mind. All that is possible because phenomena don't exist inherently. For someone who says emptiness doesn't make sense, then really, to be honest, nothing makes sense. How could anything be possible? Does that make sense? Because emptiness is just another way of saying interdependent. It's looking at the same thing from a slightly different angle. Is that making sense? So from one point of view, because it exists in dependence on something else, it doesn't exist independently or inherently. Saying existing inherently is just saying it's already in the object to be this, that, and the other. It doesn't need anything else to be that. Think of the water being wet. When we say water is not naturally hot, because you need something else to heat it up. Water is naturally wet. That's how we usually think of it. From a Buddhist point of view, this is a good analogy, but Buddhists would even say, well, even the wetness of water is not inherent in the water, because you need something other than this wetness that enables the wetness to exist. Right? So therefore, when we say it being dependently arisen, that's just another way of looking. So emptiness looks at it from the point of view of a characteristic that phenomena do not exist, do not have, phenomena do not have a certain characteristic, which is inherent in existence. Why? Because from an affirmative side, because they only exist in dependence. And now, the way in which they exist in dependence, I'll introduce in a moment. Okay? What is it?
A very stupid question. If I don't understand the source of this debate, how things could arise inherently? Who made them inherently? How they could be created inherently? What is the rationale
Of those philosophers, of the other person. Right. Well, it's not a stupid question at all. Well, how do they come up with that? How do they come up with? Well, how do we come up with that? Right? We just like them. We also feel. I mean, before we had about Buddhism, if I asked my mom, if I explained to her what inherent existence means, and I say, Mom, what do you think? Inherent or not inherent? I'm pretty sure she'd go, inherent? What? Right? So, first of all, we don't understand this idea really. We just take it for granted, don't really pay attention to it much. Maybe some people do, but most people probably don't. And so perhaps when you hear about it, this is why most people, when they hear about emptiness, they don't go, oh yeah, right, that was not that. Right? No, it was always the opposite that we believed, even though we couldn't put it into words, but it just seemed right. So we were just born with that. We were just born with that. I mean, we can take it even further. I'm totally fascinated by this philosophical school called the Geshe, who say that everything needs a universality. There needs to be something universally there to be this, that, and the other. Right? So the whole philosophy is on that. The sense that there's some intrinsic person here. And not just that, there is a universal person. So taking it even further to a different extreme, there's a category of person that exists totally independent of any other person, and it just kind of embraces everyone as a person. It's universalities. Now, in the Pramanapatika, that is discussed. And what is very interesting, I find, then they take person and they take numbers. Right? Numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4. So when you talk about one person, the number 1 and the person, how does that 1 relate to the person? Is there a universal 1? Actually, there's a YouTube video, it's beautiful. It gives you 3 possibilities as to the existence of numbers. Platonism, like the Platonic existence of numbers, or Platonism, nominalism, and fictionalism. Platonism means numbers, like when we say 1 vase, there must be a separate 1. 1, 2, 3, and so forth. These numbers must exist somewhere separate from the objects which they numerically specify. Okay? So they must exist separately. Then there is nominalism, where it's just a short video, it's very beautiful, where the person says, no, the number, really the way it exists, and explains it like, for instance, if you teach children numbers, you take 1 pen and another pen, and you say, look, here, for 2 fingers, there's 2 because there's that pen, and there's that finger, and there's that finger. So in relation to this object being there twice, we label 2. That's mathematical nominalism. And there's fictionalism saying, oh, there really aren't any numbers. There are numbers really there, we just make them up. Now, does that sound familiar, those 3? Anything comes to mind? Trickstream, middle way? Maybe? What's the first one? Extreme? Extreme of purification. There's really something out there. There are these numbers that they're out there inherently, have their own existence, and we kind of just, when it's necessary, we bring them together with a vase or a table, etc. It's like a universality, some universal numbers. It exists in and of itself, and we just, for our own purpose, bring them together with the objects. Then fictionalism, there are no numbers, there's nothing there, we just make them up. That's like, there's no table, we just make it up. No. Nominalism it's merely the name. Based on what we count, we say there's 2 tables, but those don't exist separate from the tables or from fingers, etc. Right? Very interesting. In mathematics, there's like a whole philosophy on that. I didn't know. It's like what? They count and have formulas, and then they have a whole philosophy on how those numbers exist. I don't know whether those are mathematicians or I have no idea. It's a very interesting short video online. This guy's really good at explaining those 3 ideas. And it's like, wow, that's the 2 extremes in the middle. Right? Now, do you have a sense? Can you kind of relate to this idea that numbers, there's like a whole pool of numbers existing out there, and I mean, just could you relate to that at least, right? I'm not saying, once you've kind of been influenced by Buddhism, that no longer makes sense. But maybe previous to that, that was possibly an assumption we had. There are these numbers out there, and they exist separate, because otherwise, how could you think about 1 table, 2 tables, 1 chair, 2 chairs? It's like 1, 1, 1. So, since chair and 1 are not the same, and chairs and tables are not the same, therefore the oneness must be separate. That may be a conclusion we come to, but of course that doesn't make sense. There's a sense that there are numbers over there, this pool of numbers, and the moment you need to count, you borrow those numbers. Or a pool of tables. And there's something we just studied in the Impermanence, which is really interesting. Might as well share it with you. I think it's so interesting. When we use the word person and impermanent, okay? Tomer, the person, and impermanent. In fact, when we talk about things, we usually need to talk about a basis and a characteristic. We just say tomer. This doesn't help you to understand who he is. So I use characteristics. Alright? So in terms of his philosophical mode of existence, well, he is impermanent. So I say tomer is impermanent. So when I use those words, tomer is impermanent, versus saying tomer's impermanence. I'm really saying the same thing. I'm really talking about him being impermanent and not being permanent, alright? But in one case, I link the characteristic and the basis, tomer, with the genitive. In Tibetan, we don't have to say impermanent or impermanence. It's not necessary. In Tibetan, tomer is tomer, and mitapa means impermanent. So I can say tomer gi mitapa, which is tomer's impermanent, tomer's being impermanent, or I can say tomer mitapa, which means tomer is impermanent. I'm saying basically the same thing. I'm bringing the 2 together, this quality of being impermanent, bringing it together with tomer. But those words, because of the genitive in one case and not using the genitive in the other case, appear differently to the mind. When I say tomer is impermanent, or he is impermanent, in English you have to add the word is. In Tibetan you can get away with that. Implied is that he is impermanent. Those words are described as words, they're described as words which do not exclude other characteristics. While the word tomer's impermanence are words that exclude other characteristics. What does that mean? According to Geshe, he says that when I say tomer's impermanence, I'm excluding his impermanence from David's impermanence, right? When I say David's impermanence, tomer's impermanence. So from that, it kind of suggests that he has his impermanence and David has his own, right? They have our own impermanence. When I say tomer is impermanent, that doesn't happen. Then I say David is impermanent and he's impermanent. They're both are impermanent. Oh, they're sharing impermanence. It doesn't exclude. It doesn't exclude that possibility. So Tomer is impermanent. Tomer is a human being. David is a human being. Oh, there's this being a human that they share. Because those words, just the way they appear to our conceptual mind upon hearing them, suggest, oh, he is impermanent, he's a human being, he's a human being, he's Israeli, so they're both, there's some Israeliness that pervades both of them. That's what words allow. They don't exclude the fact that actually David's being an Israeli is not the same. They don't share, because the basis of imputation, based on which I call him Israeli, is totally different from the basis of imputation, based on which I call him Israeli, or man, or human being, whatever, right? I was just thinking, human being. David is not, they don't share, I mean, your human beingness is not his, and his is not. They're contradictory. And only based on the fact that I see similarities, I therefore apply the same word. But that doesn't mean that your human beingness, the fact that your human being is his or vice versa. And those words, his human beingness, you don't say that in English, but in Tibetan you can, his being a human is not his being a human. But if I say he's human and he's human, that seems to suggest it's possible. Okay? Through the language. And that gives room for misapprehension, because we already have a sense that there's something intrinsic, and that sense of him being a human somehow intrinsic, when you exaggerate that, when you take it even further, you may come to the conclusion there's an inherent human beingness that kind of seems to embrace both. And then I start generalizing. Okay? That gives room for generalization. Because he's humans, and I don't like humans, well, I don't like him either, because he's also a human. Right? Or being Israeli, I don't like an Israeli. I don't like him, he's Israeli. I don't like him, he's Israeli. Just because I see some similarity, and I associate that with something I dislike, I then say I dislike that one too. There you have it. That would be racism. Or if it was not about your nationality, if it was about your gender, it'd be gender bias. If it would be, I don't know, whatever, it would be something undesirable and definitely trouble. Okay? This generalization, so we generalize. If it was the same person, okay? If it's the same person, for instance, David, he harmed me last week, okay? And now I'm saying David is a jerk. Last week's David, who I called a jerk, since I still call him David today, therefore it's still a jerk. So holding a grudge, as in like, sorry for that. Sorry. No, it's just, if I hold a grudge, there's also a sense that this jerkness is still with him. It's still he's kind of carrying it around. Well, my sense of permanence, of course, comes into that, but also something that comes along with being David. Because I've decided that's my view. Right? Am I making sense? So the Vaisheshika, they actually spell it out. They have a whole philosophy on that, which is so great, because we all have such a sense, sometimes more than at other times, especially when emotions are involved, and we're not even aware of that. We couldn't spell it out. We're just not aware. And then you have the Vaisheshikas that spell it out, and you go, oh my God, that's me. Right? By recognizing, they kind of have a whole philosophy on my wrong views. Right? So I can become aware of that. And it's just an exaggerated version of inherent existence. Okay? That animals have, that living beings have in general, but as humans, having human intelligence, we can actually, unfortunately, take our wrong views and make even bigger wrong views out of them. Right? So you have that with the self, making like whole philosophies about superego and what have you. Do it with regard to the idea of something intrinsic, some humanness, and those two share. Okay? Numbers, with numbers, you end up with mathematical Platonism, etc. Am I making sense? Right? It's incredible. There are whole philosophies on that. But that's why it's so helpful to learn about these philosophies, because they basically spell out certain views that we may have, unconsciously or consciously, and of course not at all times. Right? But those views, we act upon them in such a way that they lead to our future suffering. Am I making sense? Right? So the Vaisheshikas, I love them. We learned about them. Initially I didn't like them. I was like, I want to learn the Buddhist system. Now I can see the values of learning some of these aspects, because they're basically spelling it out. So I've said that in relation to those words. It's exactly explained in that context. And the context is talking about Vaisheshikas and about how language affects the way we think about things. Right? How it can actually reinforce. Of course, they can only be reinforced because we have already that wrong view. And then depending on how we use language, David's impermanence, Tomer's impermanence, that excludes. That is kind of pretty clear. His impermanence versus his. There I can draw a line. But the moment I say he is impermanent and he's impermanent, oh, therefore, they're both impermanent. Therefore, am I making, does that make sense? It's a little bit difficult, that idea, but from your faces it seems, yeah, sort of clever. Yes, Tom?
Could you please explain about the fact that you called Tomer's being human, and the Buddha being human? So you use the same word, being human. So they're not, maybe they don't manifest the same way in both of them, but still you use the same word. So there's still some similarity. So what is?
Good question. Good question. So he's saying, yeah, I kind of get that, right? Okay, so him being a human and him being human is not the same, but you use the same word. What is that? What is that? What is it? A label. All right. But why do I use it for him and him too? If there's not some external humanness, right? Why do I use it for him and I use it for him? It's a label, yes. So why? They shared the same. Wow, the same. Is it the same?
It's not the
Same
same.
characteristics, not the
It's
same.
label on him and it's label on him. It's different.
It's different? Okay. But why do I give the same name?
To differentiate it maybe from other kinds of beings.
Alright, but I could just use like Tomer's human. If I say from now on I can only talk about him being impermanent as T impermanent. Oh no, D impermanent and T impermanent. Right? But I use the same word. I say impermanent. How come?
What is the definition of a person?
What is the definition of a person?
That which is imputed.
Oh, okay, very good. Nissim is kind of right going into a label has a definition, right? A label is actually a symbol we use for something that it symbolizes, which means, for instance, a person. How do we define a person?
So maybe to answer myself.
What?
Maybe to answer myself.
You answer yourself, that's good.
So like labels are like drawing, that's how we see it, like drawing a line around.
Very good.
So, like defining, maybe arbitrary, but defining something with lines around them. So because we don't distinguish from David's humanity and Tomer's humanity, we don't perceive them as different, or we decide not to perceive them as different. We just make a label of the thing that is.
Okay. Well, to add my own view on this, which I would agree with you on most of that, we're just trying to make sense of this world. We use language to categorize things based on similarities. In German, it's quite interesting. We have two words for saying it's the same.